My name is Caitlin Whitaker. I'm a brigadier general in the United States Air Force. But to my father, I've always just been his daughter who chose the barracks over the boardroom. That's what he said into the mic that night, smiling like he'd just landed another billion-dollar defense contract, and the room laughed on cue. He didn't look at me when he said it. He never did, not really. His glass caught the light as he raised it in a silent toast to himself, and the laughter rippled through the chandeliered ballroom like champagne fizz cold. Effortless, rehearsed, and utterly focused on the lack of zeros in my paycheck. I stood in uniform, medals catching the spotlight, heels quiet against the marble. I smiled, the way soldiers smile when they're bleeding and can't let it show. I've stood under mortar fire and made decisions that cost lives, but that laugh? That was sharper than any blast. He was the center of the room, as always, surrounded by senators, CEOs, and a carefully curated aura of power. William Whitaker didn't walk into rooms. He owned them, or thought he did. He told my story like it was his, twisted it into a punchline, and they laughed because they believed him. Behind my controlled expression was a memory. The sound of his voice years ago, telling me I'd come crawling back one day, broke and regretful. But I never crawled. I flew. The truth was, he had no idea what that uniform had cost me. What it had cost the soldiers I lost. The pride he mocked was paid for in blood, and the contract he would soon brag about built on a foundation stained with it. When the host called my name, the air in the ballroom shifted. Silence, sharp and immediate. My father's smile faltered, just slightly, but enough. I walked forward slowly, not because I wanted to make a scene, but because I wanted him to see me, really see me. Not the cadet he dismissed, not the girl who walked away from greatness, but the woman who had returned not to ask for approval, but to deliver the truth. And when the spotlight hit the rows of ribbons on my chest, I saw his jaw twitch. A movement so small, only I could catch it. The subtle tremor of a man losing control. He caught his glass, but the crystal chinked against the stage like a warning bell. I grew up in a penthouse that overlooked Manhattan like it owned the skyline. Everything in that apartment gleamed: marble floors, glass walls, a father who spoke in stock tickers and corporate forecasts. Love was measured in milestones and market value, not moments. When I got into MIT, he popped open a bottle of Dom Perignon, like we'd closed a deal. Legacy secured, he said, already mapping out my future at Atlas Corps, as if my life were just another acquisition. I smiled because that was what was expected, but something inside me recoiled. He talked about control like it was a gift. I'd carry his empire forward, wear the name like armor, and lead the company like he never left. I was supposed to be grateful for the vision he had for me, but I never got to draw my own. He didn't see me. Not the way a father sees a daughter. He saw potential, structure, and return on investment. The school I went to, the grades I earned, the company I'd inherited, was all part of the brand. By my junior year, I'd memorized every handshake, every elevator pitch, every fake smile that filled our home. There were no bedtime stories, just quarterly reports and reminders of what failure would cost. He didn't raise a child, he groomed a successor. But the more he outlined my path, the more I felt erased by it. I wasn't choosing MIT, I was fulfilling his blueprint. Somewhere between algorithms and boardroom internships, I realized I didn't recognize myself anymore. I was a product. Sharpened, polished, empty. The night I placed my enlistment papers on the dinner table, the air in the room shifted. My father stared at them like they were a stain on his linen napkin. "What is this?" he asked, though he already knew. I told him I wasn't going to business school. I wasn't joining Atlas Corps. I was joining the Air Force. His hand trembled around his wine glass, then steadied in that cold, practiced way he had when closing deals. "If you walk out that door, don't expect a cent," he said, voice low, like it was beneath him to raise it. I told him I wasn't asking for one. Silence settled between us, thick with everything we'd never said and never would. I packed a single duffel, just uniforms, my mother's photo, and a letter she once wrote me in blue ink. As the elevator dropped to the lobby, I realized it was the first time I'd ever left that building without a security escort or a plan carved by him. Outside, rain clung to the city like it was trying to wash something away. I didn't look back at the tower. I didn't need to. That place was never mine. Not the marble floors, not the name, not the legacy. None of it belonged to me. When the bus pulled away, I felt it, a sharp, aching relief. I hadn't run, I had chosen, and for the first time in my life, I was free of the version of me he tried to build. Basic training stripped everything down. My name, my background, even the way I stood. All that was left was sweat, grit, and the kind of silence that taught you who you really were. Every month, I sent a letter home. Always addressed to William Whitaker. Always signed, Your daughter, Caitlin. I didn't expect a reply, but I wrote anyway, like muscle memory. Like maybe some part of me still hoped he'd care enough to read them. He never did. Not one word came back. But I kept writing, because the act of reaching out felt like holding on to a thread that hadn't snapped yet. Late one night in the barracks, I found an old envelope tucked inside the photo of my mother I carried. Her handwriting in blue ink read, Don't fight for approval. Fight for purpose. I read that line until the paper wore thin beneath my fingers. It hit me then. She had served once too, before he made her quit. I asked one of the older officers about her name, and he remembered. She was a damn good systems engineer. Quiet, but brilliant, and gone too soon from the service. He called it her moment of weakness. I called it theft. And for the first time, I realized I hadn't joined the Air Force just to escape him. I joined to finish something she never got to. The more I trained, the more I understood her. The hunger for structure. The pride in getting it right. The quiet dignity in standing tall for something bigger than yourself. That legacy wasn't written in stock options or press releases. It was in her sacrifice. In every letter I sent into silence. In every mile I ran until my legs shook, chasing the kind of purpose she was forced to abandon. By the time I earned my first deployment, I no longer served for his approval. I served her. For me. For the version of both of us that never got a chance to finish the mission. The air that night in Syria smelled like dust and hot metal. We were mid-operation, tracking heat signatures across a hostile zone, when the drone feed went dark. 1 second, we had control. The next, it was falling from the sky. It hit just beyond our perimeter. The explosion was fast, brutal. Ryan Ellis didn't make it. 23 years old. Smart. Steady. Always first to volunteer. He bled out before the medevac even landed. I ran the logs myself. The fault pointed straight to the software, a shortcut in the power distribution code that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't a glitch. It was a decision. Intentional, calculated, and deadly. Atlas Corps, my father's company. I stared at that name on the terminal like it was written in blood. They'd altered the drone system to save energy and lower costs. Ryan's life had been traded for a better profit margin. I filed the report with full documentation. Attachments. Logs. Timelines. Names. Everything airtight. I expected resistance, sure, but I didn't expect it to be silenced. 48 hours later, the file was still in the system, but it was reclassified as System Error, Top-Tier Review. No ticket number, no confirmation. Just silence on my end. When I asked about it, the admin said the Major General had flagged it personally, and it was out of my pay grade. But I knew better. That kind of error wears a suit and has a lobbyist on speed dial. Somewhere, someone had decided this was too inconvenient to exist. They didn't just delete data. They erased accountability. I stared at the empty inbox like it was a grave. That's when the anger settled in. Not the kind that explodes, but the kind that coils. Tight, cold, permanent. I stopped writing letters home that week. The last thing I needed was another silence. From that moment, I knew the truth wasn't going to be given. It had to be taken. Not with rage, with proof, with strategy, with war. And this time, I wouldn't be fighting for rank or orders. I'd be fighting for Ryan. For every name they buried beneath profit sheets. For the soul of the union they had no right to touch. The house smelled like lavender and old books. My mother had always kept things neat, even when the rest of her life was falling apart. She was gone now, and the silence felt heavier than anything the war had taught me to carry. I was alone, sorting through her things, when I found the folder tucked behind a stack of cookbooks in the kitchen drawer. It wasn't labeled, but the weight of it told me it mattered. Inside were technical schematics, signed approvals, and internal memos. His name was on the cover page. William Whitaker. His initials marked the change in the drone's control code. The same change that killed Ryan. I stared at the ink, like it was a bruise I'd never seen before. At the bottom of the stack was a folded letter. The handwriting was hers. Steady, blue, familiar. I tried to stop him. He used everything he had to silence me. Don't fight for approval. Fight for purpose. Choose truth over comfort, she'd written. Right over easy, even if it breaks you first. I sat at the table, her words open in front of me, the files spread like a battlefield between grief and purpose. She had kept the truth, buried it quietly, like a message meant for the right moment. I think she always knew I'd come looking. That night, I didn't sleep. I read every page, highlighted every lie, and marked every name. Her voice echoed in my mind like a final command. It didn't feel like mourning anymore. It felt like preparation. By dawn, I knew. This wasn't just my burden to carry, it was my mission. My mother had left me more than memories. She had left me proof, and a choice I could no longer avoid. I sent the file directly to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Not through channels, not through the system that already proved it could be bought. I wanted it in the hands that couldn't ignore it. The reply came fast. They were reviewing it, and they confirmed what I already knew. Atlas Corps was the frontrunner for a $7 billion contract set to be announced at the upcoming Defense Innovation Gala. That contract was my father's crowning achievement, the final jewel in a legacy built on silence. And he was preparing to claim it under chandeliers and camera flashes, with senators nodding in the front row. But this time, he wouldn't be the only one holding the mic. I was assigned to attend as part of the oversight committee. I would be standing on the same stage, in full uniform, with the full truth at my back. Ethan confirmed my father knew. He said the old man wanted to meet, to talk. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to discuss. Instead, I spent nights tightening the file, cross-referencing reports, preparing statements, coordinating with military legal counsel. This wasn't just about exposure anymore. It was about accountability. The stage was set. The spotlights were aimed. He thought he was walking into a celebration. I was walking into war, not to destroy him, but to make sure no one else ever had to bleed for his version of success. The power he worshipped was built on lies. And for the first time, I was ready to stand tall enough that he'd have no choice but to look up. Union Center gleamed like a palace that night. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in gold, and power walked in on polished shoes. My father was already on stage, soaking in applause, shaking hands like royalty. He talked about innovation, resilience, and national pride. Then, with that same smirk he wore the night I left home, he added, "At least the Air Force pays my daughter's rent." Laughter spread like wildfire, effortless and smug. I didn't flinch. I stood near the back, full-dress uniform, medals lined across my chest, heels silent on the marble. The spotlight hadn't found me yet, but it would. Then the MC stepped up, voice loud and clear. The Air Force Oversight Committee is honored to welcome Brigadier General Caitlin Whitaker. The room froze. Every head turned. He didn't. Not yet. I walked forward slowly, each step deliberate. When the light caught my ribbons, I saw his jaw twitch. The subtle tremor of a man losing control. That was when he looked. That was when the truth hit him. The chief of staff met me at center stage and offered his hand. "We're proud to have you lead oversight tonight," he said, voice cutting through the silence. Cameras flashed like lightning. I took the mic, looked straight at the room that once laughed at me. Progress without integrity isn't progress. It's danger dressed up to sell. No applause followed. Just breath held tight. The screen behind me flickered. Atlas Corp's logo vanished. In its place, a classified report lit up the wall, signed by William Whitaker. Authorization for the software change that cost a soldier's life. Gasps broke the silence like glass. My father turned pale. Lips parted. But no words came. He looked at me, like a stranger. He whispered, "What did you do?" I answered without raising my voice. "What you taught me. Protect the brand. Only this one's called truth." The chief leaned in and said quietly, "Your testimony is scheduled before Congress next week." I nodded once. "I'll be there." I'm 70, 19. All 70. All 17. The 79. The 7D. I'm Mene. NNS. The room didn't explode. It didn't need to. The silence said everything. He built an empire on secrets. I cracked it open with facts. As I turned to leave, his voice came behind me. "You think you've won? You just destroyed everything I built." I stopped, faced him under the lights that now felt too hot for him. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe you built it wrong." Then I walked away, the echo of my boots louder than the applause he used to crave. A year later, the noise had faded. The headlines moved on. I hadn't. The ensuing legal and political battle had stripped Atlas Corp to its bones. The lawsuits and divestment were brutal, public, and absolute. William Whitaker was ruined, stripped of his name's perceived value. I was invited to speak at the Virginia Veterans Center, expecting handshakes and polite applause. What I didn't expect was to find my father behind the counter, apron on, pouring coffee for a man in a wheelchair. He noticed me before I could turn away. For a moment, he just stood there, a pot in one hand, a paper cup in the other. Then he smiled, small and real. "They call me Rich here, not Sir," he said. "I like that better." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He looked different. Older, smaller somehow, but also more grounded. The sharpness had dulled. The weight of ambition was replaced by something quieter. We sat in a corner booth. The table between us was scarred with years of use. Neither of us brought up the past, but it filled the space anyway. He slid an envelope across the table. "I sold the company," he said. "Every last share. The money went into a scholarship fund for veterans' kids, in Evelyn's name. Inside were the papers. Legal, notarized, final. The Evelyn Foundation, focused on engineering programs, focused on finishing what she never got to. She deserved her name back," he said. I nodded, throat tight. She'd be proud. He blinked fast. "So am I." No apologies came. None were needed. Forgiveness sat between us like a quiet agreement. A young vet rolled past and patted his shoulder. "Good pour today, Rich." My father laughed, a soft, unguarded sound I hadn't heard in decades. That laugh said more than words ever could. It said he'd stopped running from himself. And maybe that was enough. We didn't fix everything. Some things just settle, like dust after a storm. But when I left, the weight I carried for years felt a little lighter. Maybe healing doesn't come from answers. Maybe it comes from presence. The classroom was quiet after the lecture. Cadets shuffled papers, some already halfway out the door, but one lingered near the front, eyes bright with something more than curiosity. "Ma'am?" she asked, almost hesitant. "What do you do when no one believes in you?" I paused, remembering too well how that question used to live in my chest. I smiled. "You don't prove them wrong," I said. "You outgrow them." She nodded. the kind of nod that meant she'd remember it long after she left this room. Later, I stood by the window in my office. Snow fell gently, covering the base in silence. Across the grounds, the Evelyn Bridge arched over the river, steel catching light, like quiet forgiveness. My father's last project, finished before he passed. No plaque, no spotlight, just strength, just grace. A bridge where there used to be a distance. Outside, the cadets were running drills, voices sharp, determined, full of belief. I watched them and felt something settle inside me. Not victory, not closure, just peace. Sometimes, what lasts isn't revenge or even justice, it's legacy. And I finally knew mine was bigger than anything he could have built.